Pathetic boy, you never had a head for success. The sentence still lives in my chest like a splinter. It was my father's summation of me, tossed out between weather talk and gas prices, as if verdicts were small talk. A week later, my name trended, not a whisper loud, like church bells. Headlines said it, as if I'd borrowed someone else's life, one of the youngest male founders on Wall Street. I didn't feel different. I still double-knotted my shoes. I still counted breaths when the room felt tight. But when the announcement hit, my phone turned into a siren pings. Calls. Strangers who suddenly said they'd always believed. I smiled where I was supposed to, nodded, took screenshots for my mother in case the internet changed its mind. At the family barbecue, I arrived late on purpose, the way a tide chooses the hour it decides to touch the dock. The Ferrari Rosso red, loud as a trumpet, rolled through the quiet of our street like a rumor. It wasn't about the car. It was about clarity, a language my father couldn't edit, a sentence with horsepower. The backyard stilled, jokes thinned, the grill hissed, paper plates bent in midair. "Sorry I'm late," I said, almost gently. Traffic from New York was terrible. My father held the spatula like a gavel he'd forgotten how to drop. Guests smiled, the way people smile at fires they don't understand. My mother's hand rose to her mouth, a small white flag. "My name is Caleb Whitaker. I'm 23. I built a financial technology company from my apartment in Charleston, South Carolina, with a laptop that burned my thighs and code that kept changing its mind at 3 a.m. Back home, success is counted in calluses and sunburn. Men measure worth in what you can lift, how long you can hold it. My father, Nathan, ran a landscaping company for 30 years and believed truth lives under fingernails, blackened by oil and soil. I used to believe that too. Then I learned numbers carry their own weight. That pattern is a kind of shovel, that an algorithm can dig futures out of noise if you teach it where to listen. I wasn't trying to escape him. I was trying to inherit differently. People think triumph sounds like symbols. Mine sounded like silence, like the backyard, when I pocketed my keys and stepped onto the grass I'd mowed as a boy. I could still feel the heat of summers spent pushing a mower in long, narrow rows, sweat writing its name down my spine. I could still hear his voice telling me that real men don't sit behind screens, and maybe that's why I came the way I did. Not to gloat, to translate, to say, in a language of chrome and quiet, that I hadn't left the family. I had left the map. Eyes climbed over the car, then over me, searching for the trick. I kept my hands steady, my voice even. This wasn't revenge. This was a declaration. See me. Not the rumor. Not the boy you decided I was. Me. I learned to count by wheelbarrows. 1 load of mulch, 2 loads of gravel, 3 bundles of sod. Summers began at dawn and ended when the sky bruised purple over the marsh. My father's truck would rattle into the yard, the smell of gasoline and cut grass riding shotgun. He'd hand me gloves a size too big and say, "Work makes a man." It sounded like a blessing. It landed like a rule. He built Whitaker, landscaping from a rusted mower and a handshake. 30 years later, there were crews and routes and a calendar that looked like a tiled floor, no empty squares. Clients waved from porches. Kids chased sprinklers through the arcs we set. I learned the names of trees the way other boys memorized ball players. Crepe myrtle, live oak, loblolly pine. We pruned, edged, planted. He taught me to listen to engines, to feel when a belt was about to snap, to smell when rain meant we'd lose daylight. There was a right way to coil a hose, a right way to tighten a blade, a right way to carry your tired without complaining. At noon, we'd sit on the tailgate, shirts clinging, fingers greened from chlorophyll. He'd unwrap sandwiches like small gifts and talk about margins, how 3 minutes saved at each house could buy a new trimmer by August. He didn't call it finance. He called it survival math. I watched him turn nickels into gear and late payments into lessons. The world made sense when you could sweep it into straight lines. My mother, Elaine, moved softer. Third-grade teacher, voice like the quiet part of a hymn. She kept a jar by the stove for field trip money, and, I would learn later, for me, when Dad's words set my jaw tight, she'd place a palm on my shoulder blade and remind me to breathe from lower down. Work hard, she'd say, but work true. She never contradicted him in public. That was her boundary and her shield. Somewhere along the row of years, hard work became hard labor in his mouth. The difference seemed small at first, a syllable, a shrug, but I felt the tilt. In his world, proof lived under your nails and across your back. Screens did not sweat. Ideas did not ache. If a man came home without grass on his socks, what had he done? I tried to fit there. I did. I learned to line up the mower's wheels so the pass was clean, to feather the throttle near fences, to tip a wheelbarrow without spilling. But after dark, I'd open my laptop and see another kind of field numbers like constellations, patterns twitching under the surface. It was the same itch. Make it tidier, faster, fairer. I didn't have the words yet, only the feeling that effort could be measured in more than pounds lifted. Dad would pass my door, grumble something about boys and screens, and I'd press one more key. I wasn't refusing his language. I was teaching my hands a second one. The acceptance letter came on a cloudy Thursday, the kind that makes Charleston look like it's thinking. University of South Carolina Business. I remember the seal more than the words, raised and serious under my thumb. I carried it into the kitchen like a bird I wasn't sure how to hold. Dad was sorting invoices, a fan rattling on the counter. He didn't look up until the envelope tapped the wood. College boys think they know everything until they meet the real world, he said, glancing at the letter the way you glance at a receipt you're not paying. He slid a 20 across the table, gas money and goodbye. Don't forget where supper comes from. Mom hugged me so tight my chest clicked. Later, when he stepped out to take a call, she pressed 5 folded hundreds into my palm, eyes quick and bright. For the gap between brave and rent, she whispered. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I memorized the weight of the bills instead. Love sometimes arrives disguised as small arithmetic. Columbia tasted like possibility and cafeteria coffee. I took macro, micro, and every class that sniffed of systems. Nights, I drifted from spreadsheets into code like someone crossing a footbridge at dusk. Data sets were messy yards. I wanted to edge them, make the lines clean. During sophomore year, the thing that became everything arrived as a question scribbled in a notebook. What if people could see risk, the way farmers smell rain? I built an early model in a week that bled into 2. It was ugly at first: duct tape, chewing gum, a handful of APIs, and then it began to hum. Patterns surfaced like fish near dawn. A professor, Dr. Miriam Layton, found me in the lab one night, the last fluorescent buzzing above our heads. She watched the model chew a decade of price history and spit out a heat map that did not lie. This could change how regular folks invest, she said, voice low, like we were in church. Not just the firms with lobbies. She brought coffee and questions. She poked every weak seam, and still, the thing held. I called home from the library to tell them I was pausing school to build it properly. Mom's breath hitched. I pictured her pinching the bridge of her nose, trying to keep the room from spinning. "Are you safe?" she asked finally. Not, "Are you sure?" She knew certainty is a rumor. Safety was the better prayer. Dad took the phone and gave it nothing but air. A click. A dial tone, thick as syrup. I moved my mattress onto the floor of a tiny apartment and set the desk by the window so the morning could interrogate me. Ramen, side gigs, Theo Park, my roommate, then sliding a plate to me when I forgot how hunger works. I built and rebuilt the model until it stopped behaving like a magic trick and started behaving like a tool. It wasn't about beating Wall Street. It was about widening the sidewalk so more feet could fit. When I finally named the company, I didn't pick something sharp. I picked something that sounded like a promise kept. Rejection has a sound. It's the tiny bell from my email client, cheerful and unbothered, announcing another no. At first I kept them in a folder. Then I printed them ink, dates, the tidy signatures of people certain of their certainty. I taped each letter to the wall over my desk until the drywall turned into a collage of other people's limits, not as fuel, as record, a way to remember who could not imagine me. Days ran together. Code, coffee, a walk around the block to convince my lungs we still lived near trees. Nights expanded, and the city outside my window became a silhouette. We learned to live inside the margin, rent exactly on time, groceries like a logic puzzle, the thermostat set to a number that made both sense and sacrifice. Theo Park kept the apartment human. He'd rescue me from my screen with a hand on my shoulder and a plate I hadn't asked for. "You forget you have a body," he'd joke, and I'd realize my jaw ached from clenching. The model grew unevenly, genius in one corner, wobble in another. I learned to love the wobble. It told me where to shore up. When the algorithm misread a storm as a pattern, I reminded it that weather is not prophecy. When it caught a signal in the noise, quiet and stubborn as truth, I wrote notes to my future self. Trust this shape, doubt this shine. Investors rotated through our living room like weather systems. Some frowned at the folding chairs. Some complimented the scrappiness as if it were a costume. "Too young," they said. "Not enough experience. Come back when you've done the thing you're asking us to help you do." I nodded and poured more coffee and did not explain the irony because irony doesn't close around. At Thanksgiving, I went home carrying nothing but laundry and a small hope. Dad introduced me to a client as my boy, figuring things out. I smiled and swallowed. The turkey was dry. The laughter was louder than the room. In the den afterward, football filled the air with an easier language. I tried to describe what I was building: risk maps, adaptive learning, how ordinary people could make decisions with eyes that saw farther, and his gaze slid past me to a segment on lawn stripes. "See that?" he said, tapping the screen. "Clean. Straight. That's finish." At Christmas, he cleared his throat and suggested a manager role at the company. Good pay, a truck, health insurance. The offer was a lifeboat disguised as a leash. "That computer thing," he said, gentle as sandpaper, "isn't panning out." I found my mother in the kitchen later, rinsing cranberries in a colander like they were beads. "You don't owe anyone proof," she whispered, and pressed a container of leftovers into my hands like medicine. Back at the apartment, Theo taped a fresh sheet of printer paper to the wall and wrote, in his careful block letters, "You are building a door where a wall was." I laughed for the first time in weeks. Then the email bell chimed again, bright as ever. Another no. I printed it and reached for the tape. The subject line didn't blink or trumpet. It only sat there. Exclusive licensing proposal. I opened it because that's what you do when a door appears. Blackwater Capital, $14 million. Exclusive. I read it once like a tourist, twice like a translator, a third time like someone checking the locks before bed. By the 17th read, the coffee in my hand had gone cold, and my heart had learned a new rhythm, measured, stunned, precise. I called Theo first. He whooped so loud I held the phone away and laughed into my empty kitchen, the kind of laugh that shakes the dust out of your lungs. "You did it," he said, then corrected himself. "You've been doing it. They finally noticed." I could hear him tearing paper from the wall, the rejection collage, and I swore I could feel the room breathe differently. Next, I called my mother. There was a pause, that soft click in her throat when emotion rises. "Are you eating?" she asked, because love keeps its rituals even at altitude. I told her the number. She sat with the silence a moment. "Remember to sleep," she whispered. "Joy is heavy, too." I didn't call my father. It wasn't fear. It was knowing which conversations sharpen joy and which dress it down. 3 days later, I was in New York signing contracts on paper that felt expensive. Patricia Donovan, Blackwater's CEO, met my eyes with a steadiness that steadied me. We went to a restaurant that hid its prices like a magician hides cards. The napkins were the weight of promise. The plates were landscapes. Patricia raised her glass. To widening the table, she said, not to conquest, to inclusion. I felt seen in a way that didn't require performance. Back at the hotel, my cousin Evan texted like a flare over dark water. Wall Street Journal. Dude. I opened my laptop, and there I was, age displayed like a headline within the headline. 23. Again. Again. As if youth were the miracle and not the math. The years, the long nights that taught my body a new alphabet of focus. I closed the lid. The window reflected the city. Lights arranged like constellations someone had named without asking me. Clarity arrived, not as adrenaline but as a level bubble settling between two lines. I knew what I needed to do next, not for spectacle, for translation. There are people you love who can't read your language until you write it in bolder ink. I walked into a Ferrari showroom wearing jeans that still carried Charleston dust. The salesman's smile was the shape of a gate half closed, until I said the number I intended to spend. 2 hours later, a Rosso Corsa Roma idled like a heartbeat under my hands. I didn't need a car like that. I needed a sentence that even pride could not mispronounce. I booked a flight home. Memorial Day was on the horizon, and so was the backyard where my childhood still breathed in the hedges. I wasn't going to make a scene. I was going to let one arrive, quietly, with the turn of a key. The engine's hum felt almost embarrassed, like it knew it was louder than our street had ever asked for. The Roma eased into the driveway and settled beside my father's pickup, red lacquer reflecting the sagging basketball hoop and the azaleas we trimmed every spring. People say cars announce power. To me, it sounded like punctuation, a period at the end of a sentence that had wandered too long. Backyard air was thick with charcoal and sweet tea. Paper streamers curled in the humidity. Clients and cousins held plates stacked with ribs and potato salad, chatter running easy until I stepped through the gate. Then the sound thinned and folded. I could hear the grill sear, the faint rattle of ice in a cooler, a fly worrying the rim of a lemonade jug. Elaine, my mother, lifted her hand to her mouth the way she does when emotions are large and words are small. My father, Nathan, stood at the grill, spatula midair, smoke rising like a white flag that wouldn't admit it. "Sorry I'm late," I said, finding a voice that didn't shout or bow. Traffic from New York was terrible. He recovered fast, the smile he saves for clients sliding into place. "Look who remembered his last name," he called, clapping my shoulder harder than necessary. Laughter arrived right on cue, grateful for a script. "Whose car did you borrow, son?" "It's mine," I said, gentle as setting a glass on a table. "Yesterday." A few heads turned toward the driveway as if confirmation might be parked there. He nodded toward Uncle Russ, an elbowed joke already forming. "And I'm buying a jet next week." More laughter. I let it pass. I pulled the title from my pocket and offered it. He glanced down, then up, then down again, the way you check a sky that says rain in a language you don't speak. He folded the paper like it belonged to someone else and handed it back. "Must be nice to have friends who let you play with their toys," he said. "Grab a plate. Your mother made that potato salad you like." I tried. I took a plate, said hello to faces that had watched me lace cleats and load mulch. I answered questions about the weather in New York, the mileage on a car no one believed I owned, whether finance was still a thing. Every time I nudged the conversation toward the work, toward the model that could show ordinary people where storms were likely to break, my father found a reason to refill a cooler, to check a lid, to point out a lawn stripe on a neighbor's yard like it was scripture. His deflection was almost artful. Every door I opened, he leaned it quietly shut. By dusk, most guests were hugging goodbye, the kind of hugs that land on the shoulders, not the heart. I found him in his office, the one off the garage, with the pegboard of tools and a desk scarred by decades of contracts and coffee. He didn't look up when I stepped in. "Dad," I said, closing the door behind me. I want to talk about what I'm building, about what actually happened in New York. He set the pen down, finally met my eyes. There's nothing to talk about. You got lucky with some computer thing. Doesn't make you special. 14 million isn't luck, I said, careful not to raise my voice. And it's not just for me. It's for people who never got invited into rooms where risk was explained. He leaned back, gestures tightening. You know what built this family? 40 years of breaking my back. Not pressing buttons, not making up numbers on a screen. He pointed at a photo tacked above the desk him at 20, a sunburned grin beside his first truck. That's real work. That's a day you can see. What I built is real, too, I said. It just weighs different. 1. His jaw clicked. I've seen your type. Flash in the pan. It'll be gone by Christmas, and you'll be back here wanting a job, and I'll have to explain why my son couldn't hack it in the real world. There was a time those words would have hollowed me. Tonight they mapped the ground I'd already decided to cross. I set the title on the desk again, not as proof, but as translation. I came so you could see me, I said. Not to win, to be understood. He looked at the paper and then past it, out toward the driveway where 2 versions of work idled side by side. Grab a plate, he said, softer but still armored. Your mother hates when food goes to waste. I left the office without the answer I wanted, but with the calm that follows a storm naming itself. Outside, the grill hissed in the dark. Somewhere, the car ticked as metal cooled. I realized this wasn't going to be solved by volume. It would be solved by structure. By the kind of plan even a skeptic could not misread. The next morning my phone vibrated itself across the nightstand like it was trying to escape. Evan first, my cousin, with the quick texts and quicker honesty. Uncle Nate's telling folks the deal fell through, he wrote. Says you rented the car. Says you're embellishing. I stared at the words until they lost shape, then found it again, meaner. It didn't land as anger. It landed as weather. A front moving in that I could neither stop nor pretend wasn't forming. By noon, the rumors had multiplied into versions with new decorations. An aunt called to ask if I was in some kind of trouble with those New York people. Thomas Theo to me. Thomas to anyone who'd met him wearing a tie texted that my father had stopped by the apartment asking questions about where the money's going, as if money were a stray dog I might be hiding. Then Patricia emailed a single line that told me more than a paragraph could. Someone claiming to be your father phoned for details. We, of course, declined. Are you okay? That last question was the kind that checks both pulse and perimeter. I drove to my parents' house when I knew the driveway would be empty of my father's truck. Mom opened the door with a smile that trembled and led me to the kitchen, where the light is always soft, as if it knows secrets do better without glare. She made coffee we didn't drink. We stood for a moment with our hands braced on opposite edges of the counter like 2 people steadying the same table during an earthquake. What's he doing? I asked, finally. She exhaled, the sound of a tire releasing a little air so it doesn't burst. He's worried, she said. Worried looks like control when he can't find another shape for it. Worried doesn't call my partners, I said. Worried doesn't tell the church I'm lying. She folded a dish towel that didn't need folding. You know his world, she said softly. Proof wears boots there. Paper looks like trickery. Pride is a roof. It keeps out rain and sunlight both. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to tell her risk models and counterparty protections and escrow schedules as if vocabulary could rebuild trust. Instead, I asked the question I'd been avoiding because I already feared the answer. Is the business okay? Her mouth made a small line. No, she said. The word was almost a kindness. It's been hard for years. Big chains undercutting prices, fuel, labor. He won't tell you because he doesn't like the look of need in his own hands. She paused, eyes traveling to the window where the yard sat tidy as a photograph. He thinks if your way wins, then his way loses forever. He can't hold both truths yet. The revelation hit with the clean pain of a diagnosis you suspected. Not a betrayal, a map. I saw, suddenly, how my success wasn't just noise to him, it was thunder that meant the storm had already arrived over his roof. If I was real, then the future that didn't need his tools was real too. And there's a terror in being devout to a method the world stops praying in. I took her hand. I can fix the money, I said. I can't fix his story. She squeezed back, relief and worry passing between our palms like current. Maybe you can give him a different ending, she said. One where he isn't erased. When I left, I didn't have comfort. I had direction. Rumors are smoke. They tell you where the fire is. I sat in my car and stared at the house that built me. The neat lines, the edged beds, the order that had taught me to love systems. I didn't need a louder argument. I needed a plan that translated across languages, soil to code, blade to bite. I didn't want a spectacle. I wanted structure. If the story at home spoke the language of contracts and crews, then I would answer in that tongue. I called Patricia first. She listens like an operator at an old switchboard, plugging lines together until voices find each other. I need a view of landscaping in Charleston, I said. Who's consolidating? Who's solvent? Who's circling? By lunch, she sent a neat packet. 3 regional players, 2 private equity-backed, 1 family-grown with an appetite. I studied balance sheets the way Dad had studied weather. Margins thin where fuel spiked. Retention strong where foreman had been promoted from within. A note about route density that made me think of his calendar tiles tight as a mosaic. If code is a map, then this was cartography with grass stains. Greenscape Enterprises rose from the stack like a lighthouse. Owner, Harold Jenkins. Expansion-minded, generous with benefits, ruthless about routes and uptime. I asked Patricia to make an introduction, then drove to a low building near a line of crepe myrtles trained into fireworks. Harold shook my hand like a man who counts seconds. He didn't waste any. We've had our eye on Whitaker, he said, sliding a file across the table. Prime service area, sticky clients, but Nathan won't take the call. He'll take a different one, I said. From a son, I laid out what mattered to me. Full absorption of employees with better health care and PTO, a 5-year regional manager contract for Nathan with profit share, protection of legacy accounts, a public frame that read, transfer, not defeat. I spoke slowly, tried to honor the parts of my father that were architecture, not armor. Harold nodded as if he'd been waiting for this exact puzzle. We can do that, he said, but we'll need a number that feels like respect. The offer in writing arrived by evening. $1.2 million, twice the current paper value. If you looked with honest math and the terms I'd named, rigid and kind at once. It was business, yes. It was also translation, a bridge between 2 dialects of work. On the drive back, I veered toward the old industrial district where brick warehouses squat like retired ships. I walked through a dusty 15,000-square-foot cavern with light slanting through cracked panes and felt my ribs loosen. The air smelled like iron and possibility. The realtor talked about zoning and loading docks. I pictured desks on rollers, whiteboards on casters, a small auditorium built from plywood and stubbornness, a home base that said to kids like me, you don't have to leave Charleston to build something global. I signed the lease by noon the next day and texted Evan, want a job you're not ready for? He called breathless from a bus stop, laughter braided with terror. Co, he repeated, as if the letters were coins he'd never held. I've never run anything. Neither had I said. But you believe in the shape of this. We'll learn in daylight. By evening I had a folder for my father, an offer that saved the house without erasing the name on the mailbox, a key to a building where our future would get louder, not revenge, a redesign, not punishment, a plan. I didn't call ahead. I walked into his office in the afternoon heat when the air itself seems to hold its breath. The pegboard of tools watched like witnesses. He didn't look up at first, the calculator clicking beneath his thumb like a nervous tick. When he finally raised his eyes, the anger was ready, already shaped. So, he said. You decided to show. Wood was acquired. I brought something, I answered, and set the folder on his desk. No preamble, no tease. Just paper with numbers that held. He flipped the cover back, scanned the first page, then the second. I watched his jaw work like a hinge that needed oil. Greenscape? He asked, voice flat. You went behind my back. I went ahead of the cliff, I said. This keeps you, the crews, the routes, better benefits. 5-year contract for you, profit share, respect priced in. It reads, transfer, not collapse. He stood. The chair scraped hard. This is my company. I built it with this. He held up his hands, palms a map of old cuts. And you come in here with your Wall Street friends. Not Wall Street, I said softly. Charleston. Our street. Read the last page. He didn't. He stared at me like I was a storm cloud over his field. You think you can fix everything with paper. I think we can avoid losing what doesn't need to be lost, I said. Your people keep their jobs. Your name doesn't vanish. You keep building just on a different foundation. His face flushed. You want to own me. I want you to move forward, I said, with dignity. He shook his head, disgust curling his mouth. Get out. I reached into my pocket, set the Ferrari key on the papers. Red fob, small as a trick. This is for you, %. It's not at 12. He didn't touch it. I don't take charity. It's not charity, I said. It's an advance. On the work I'm asking you to lead in the new place, Traditional Industries Program. You know the territory. I need your map. His eyes flicked to the key and back, wary as a stray. I'm not your employee. I'm not your employee. Not yet, I said. But you could be my partner in something that keeps men like you from getting erased. I tapped the folder. The offer expires in 48 hours. After that, Greenscape goes to your competitors. They won't be as generous. I swallowed. Think about the crews. Think about Mom. We stared at each other across the desk that had brokered a lifetime of seasons. The clock on the wall hummed. Outside, a mower coughed to life, then smoothed out, finding its rhythm. I turned to leave. His voice caught me at the door, smaller than anger, bigger than pride. Why the key? So you can feel the future, I said, not just hear about it. I stepped into the blinding daylight, heartbeat even, breath measured. The plan would hold, or it wouldn't. I had offered a bridge. He had to decide whether water frightened him more than crossing. The next morning, a text from my mother. He drove the car to get coffee. Didn't speak about it, just drove. By evening, my phone lit again. Unknown number. Harold Jenkins. Your father called, he said. We talked terms. He's wary, but he understands the shape. 24 hours later, deal in principle. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. I exhaled like a man setting down a weight he'd been pretending wasn't heavy. Somewhere in town, my father slid the Ferrari key into his pocket and walked a little taller, not because he'd won, because he had a road again. 2 months later, I stood on a plywood stage inside the warehouse that used to hold pallets of things no one remembers. Now it held people, 200 of them, faces bright with curiosity, the air buzzing like a beehive that had learned to hum in harmony. The sign behind me read, Horizon Analytics, in letters we stenciled ourselves. Paint still a little shy of perfect. Imperfect things feel honest. You can see the hands in them. I spotted my father at the back, arms crossed, near the roll-up door where the light fell in strips. He looked like a man who'd promised himself not to fidget. My mother stood closer, tissue in hand, though she hadn't cried yet. Evan hovered side stage with a checklist and the expression of someone pretending not to count heartbeats. Theo Ty Crooked already rehearsed a smile he'd use on journalists who wanted a quote that felt like certainty. Thank you for being here, I began, voice steady, palms open. Today we launch Horizon, a company built to make financial tools legible to the people they forgot. Applause rose and softened. I kept going. We're also announcing our first local partnership. Horizon is investing $2 million in Greenscape Regional Holdings, the new parent of several landscaping companies, one of them once called Whitaker Landscaping. A murmur rippled through the room. At the back, my father's head lifted, like a man hearing his name spoken kindly after a long absence. As part of this partnership, I said, we're creating a program to help traditional service businesses compete in the digital economy without becoming something they're not. I inhaled, felt the bubble of the level settle between two lines, and I'm pleased to announce that Nathan Whitaker will lead that program as Director of Traditional Industries. The applause this time broke open. People turned to find him. He didn't wave. He nodded once, as if accepting a tool he knew how to hold. I met his eyes, and for a moment, we were just two builders across a span of noise. After, in the swirl of congratulations and microphones, he moved toward me through a river of shoulders. Up close, he looked the same, and also not. Less lifted by pride, more anchored by purpose. You planned this, he said. Not accusation. An inventory. I plan to build something that keeps doors open, I answered. The rest arranged itself. He looked around desks on wheels, whiteboards crowded with ideas, interns threading extension cords like veins. Your name isn't on the building, he said. Neither was yours, I told him. But everyone knew. A corner of his mouth tilted. The car, he said lightly. It's gone, I blinked. Gone? Sold it. Bought a truck. He paused, eyes steady. Put the rest into your stock. A truce signed, without ceremony. 6 months later, I kept a routine. Mornings by the Cooper River, afternoons stitching code to conversations with people who don't use words like alpha and beta, except for fish and kindergarten. An article framed on my desk talked about jobs created, but I preferred a different artifact, a wall of values near the door. We'd added one in black paint, suggested by my father. Remember whose shoulders you stand on. We weren't close, not the way sitcoms sell it, but every Thursday we ate barbecue at a place that smokes its meat slow enough to teach patience. He'd bring plumbers, electricians, roofers, men with clean invoices and dirty boots. They don't need a miracle, he'd say. They need a map. I listened. He was right. Driving home in a sensible sedan, I passed my father's new truck under the same streetlights that used to find us sweaty and tired. I thought about the boy I'd been, engine loud, pockets full of proof. I'd wanted revenge, and I got something quieter, a future wide enough to hold a past without breaking it. Winning, I learned, is not the sound of someone else losing. It is the room you build where both of you can work.